Introduction to Business, 2nd edition, an OpenStax textbook. Read along with the full text at openstax.org. This audiobook was produced by Open Audio. Listen for free on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or on our website at openaudio.us.
Chapter 3. Competing in the Global Marketplace. Introduction.
Learning outcomes. After reading this chapter, you should be able to answer these questions. 1. Why is global trade important to the United States, and how is it measured? 2. Why do nations trade? 3. What are the barriers to international trade? 4. How do governments and institutions foster world trade? 5. What are international economic communities? 6. How do companies enter the global marketplace? 7. What threats and opportunities exist in the global marketplace? 8. What are the advantages of multinational corporations? 9. What are the trends in the global marketplace?
Exploring business careers. Mike Schlater, Domino's Pizza. Domino's Pizza has more than 21,000 stores worldwide. Mike Schlater, former executive vice president of Domino's Pizza International Division, was also president of Domino's Canada and oversaw nearly 500 stores. Originally from Ohio, Schlater started his career with Domino's as a pizza delivery driver and worked his way up into management. Schlater saved his earnings, and with some help from his brother, he was able to accept the opportunity to have the first international Domino's franchise in Winnipeg, Manitoba, in 1983. Within weeks, Schlater's store in Canada reached higher sales than his previous store in Ohio had ever attained. However, it was not an easy start. Schlater had to identify the international suppliers and get them approved to sell their products to Domino's. This shows one of the challenges that organizations face when entering new global markets. To meet quality standards designed to protect a brand, companies must undertake an extensive review of potential new suppliers to ensure consistent product quality. By 2007, Schlater and a partner unified all of the franchises under one corporate umbrella, and Schlater is now president of Domino's of Canada Limited, which operates more than 600 stores and is located in every province, as well as the Yukon and Northwest Territories. Such an impressive career path might seem like luck to some, but Schlater achieved his success due to determination and attention to detail. Luck did play a role in one specific event in his life, though. Schlater manages dough in his business, but also came into dough by winning $250,000 in a lottery. Since Schlater believes in philanthropy, he donated the entire amount to Cardinal Carter High School in his hometown. Over the years, Schlater has donated millions of dollars to foundations and charities, such as the London Health Sciences Foundation, because he now has the ability to financially support them after spending decades climbing the corporate ladder at Domino's Pizza. A father of 3, he moved to Essex County from Winnipeg after buying the Domino's master franchise for Canada. He wanted to live close to the border because some of his children attended school in that area. The master franchisees of Domino's Pizza's international business are individuals or entities who, under a specific licensing agreement with Domino's, control all operations within a specific country. They operate their own stores, set up a distribution infrastructure to transport materials into and throughout the country, and create sub-franchisees. One particular benefit of master franchisees is their local knowledge. As discussed in this chapter, a major challenge when opening a business on foreign soil is negotiating the political, cultural, and economic differences of that country. Master franchisees allow Domino's and the franchisee to take advantage of their local expertise in dealing with marketing strategies, political and regulatory issues, and the local labor market. It takes local experience to know, for example, that access to the internet can be limited, so carryout might need to be the focus of the business, that Turkey has changed its street names 3 times in the past 30 years, so delivery is much more challenging, or that, in Japanese, there is no word for pepperoni, the most popular topping worldwide. These are just a few of the challenges that Domino's has had to overcome on the road to becoming the worldwide leader in the pizza delivery business. Under the leadership of people like Schlater, and with the help of dedicated local master franchisees, Domino's has been able to not only compete in, but to lead the global pizza delivery market.
This chapter examines the business world of the global marketplace. It focuses on the processes of taking a business global, such as licensing agreements and franchisees, the challenges that are encountered, and the regulatory systems governing the world market of the 21st century. Today, global revolutions are underway in many areas of our lives: management, politics, communications, and technology. The word global refers to boundless mobility and competition in social, business, and intellectual arenas. The purpose of this chapter is to explain how global trade is conducted. We also discuss the barriers to international trade and the organizations that foster global trade. The chapter concludes with trends in the global marketplace.
3.1 Global Trade in the United States. Learning objective: why is global trade important to the United States, and how is it measured?
Having a global vision has become an imperative for some businesses, especially large corporations, manufacturers, and retailers. A global vision can also be an important consideration for smaller firms as they work to manage costs, optimize efficiencies, and grow their market reach. Having a global vision means recognizing and reacting to international business opportunities, being aware of threats from foreign competitors in all markets, and effectively using international distribution networks to obtain raw materials and move finished products to the customer. U.S. managers must develop a global vision if they are to recognize and react to international business opportunities, as well as remain competitive at home. Often, a U.S. firm's toughest domestic competition comes from foreign companies. Moreover, a global vision enables a manager to understand that customer and distribution networks operate worldwide, blurring geographic and political barriers and making them increasingly irrelevant to business decisions. Over the past 3 decades, world trade has climbed to more than $35 trillion. U.S. companies play a major role in this growth in world trade, with 27% of the Fortune 500 companies contributing nearly 40% to the global profit pool. Among these companies are names such as Apple, Microsoft, Alphabet, U.S. Postal Service, ExxonMobil, and Samsung Electronics. Starbucks Corporation has become a fast-growing global brand committed to its core mission while integrating aspects to adapt culturally across their locations worldwide. Of Starbucks' approximately 37,000 stores, almost 50% are international stores that contribute a substantial amount to the company's revenues, which have grown from $21.3 billion in 2016 to nearly $40 billion in 2026. Go into a Paris McDonald's, and you may not recognize where you are. Instead of utilitarian tables and other plastic features, you might find some unique and more elegant McDonald's restaurants. For example, just outside of Paris, the restaurant is housed in an old railway station built in 1905. The French typically prefer to preserve historic buildings, rather than replace them with modern structures. These buildings bring with them architecture and features not typically seen in McDonald's, including original woodwork, ornate facades, and dining terraces. Many locations feature local menu items, such as French cheeses or macarons, along with the traditional McDonald's offerings. Global business is not a one-way street, where only U.S. companies sell their wares and services throughout the world. Foreign competition in the domestic market used to be relatively rare, but now occurs in almost every industry. In fact, U.S. makers of electronic goods, cars, shoes, clothing, and a host of other consumer and industrial products have struggled to maintain their domestic market shares against foreign competitors. Toyota now has over 15% of the U.S. auto market, followed by Honda and Nissan at approximately 8%. Nevertheless, the global market has created vast new business opportunities for many U.S. firms. The importance of global business to the United States. Many countries depend more on international commerce than the United States does. For example, Germany derives around 80% of their gross domestic product, GDP, from world trade, with France and Great Britain around 60%, compared to 28% for the United States. Nevertheless, the impact of international business on the U.S. economy is still impressive. About 20% of U.S. jobs are trade-dependent and have grown at a rate 4 times the growth of US-dependent jobs. Nearly every US state has realized a growth of jobs attributable to trade. Trade has an effect on both service and manufacturing jobs. These statistics might seem to imply that practically every business in the United States is selling its wares throughout the world, but most is accounted for by big business. About 85% of all US exports of manufactured goods are shipped by 250 companies, yet 98% of all exporters are small and medium-sized firms. The impact of conflict on global trade. Global conflicts can change the way the world conducts business. The immediate impacts of conflicts abroad include short-term shrinkages of global trade. Globalization, however, will continue because the world's major markets are too vitally integrated for globalization to stop. Nevertheless, conflicts abroad can cause slow growth and can make globalization efforts more costly. For example, companies are investing in additional insurance to provide security for overseas staff and property. Movements of cargo can be impacted by border restrictions and inspections, which can force firms to stock more inventory. Immigration policies and relationships across borders can impact the employment pool in certain industries. The impact of conflicts abroad may lessen over time, but multinational firms will need to continue to consider how conflicts across the globe impact their business model and operations. Measuring trade between nations. International trade can improve relationships across borders, can help ease tensions among nations, and, economically speaking, bolsters economies, raises people's standard of living, provides jobs, and improves the quality of life. The value of international trade is over $30 trillion a year and growing. This section takes a look at some key measures of international trade: exports and imports, the balance of trade, the balance of payments, and exchange rates. Exports and imports. Higher income nations, those with mature communication, financial, educational, and distribution systems, are the major players in international trade. They account for about 50% of the world's exports and imports. Exports are goods and services made in one country and sold to others. Imports are goods and services that are bought from other countries. The United States is the largest importer and second largest exporter in the world. Each year, the United States exports more semiconductors, pharmaceutical and medical devices, and industrial goods than the year before, in addition to soybeans, wheat, and cotton. A third of U.S. farm acreage is devoted to crops for export. The United States is also a major exporter of high-tech equipment, such as aerospace components and manufacturing equipment. For more than 300,000 U.S. companies, approximately 98% of them small and medium-sized firms, international trade offers exciting and profitable opportunities. Among the largest U.S. exporters are ExxonMobil, Apple, Ford Motor Company, Cargill, and Caterpillar. Despite the availability of many resources and great variety of products, imports to the United States are also growing. Some of these imports are minerals and oil, mechanical equipment, gemstones and precious metals, plastics and organic chemicals. Differences in facilities and access to resources, such as natural resources and labor, in other countries make it cheaper to import materials than to produce them domestically. Many hot beverages popular in the United States, coffee, tea, and cocoa, are imported. Several factors, including lower manufacturing costs, have accounted for increases in imports from abroad. Balance of trade. The difference between the value of a country's exports and the value of its imports during a specific time is the country's balance of trade. A country that exports more than it imports is said to have a favorable balance of trade, called a trade surplus. A country that imports more than it exports is said to have an unfavorable balance of trade, or a trade deficit. When imports exceed exports, more money from trade flows out of the country than flows into it. Although U.S. exports have been growing, we still import more than we export. We have had an unfavorable balance of trade throughout the last several decades. In 2025, U.S. exports totaled $2.4 trillion, yet our imports were approximately $3.5 trillion. Thus, In 2025, the United States had a trade deficit of $900 billion. America's exports continue to grow, but not as fast as our imports. The export of goods, such as computers, trucks, and airplanes, is very strong. The sector that is lagging in significant growth is the export of services. Although America exports many services, ranging from maintenance and repair services to travel to financial services, part of the problem is due to piracy, which leads companies to restrict the distribution of their services to certain regions. The FBI estimates that the theft of intellectual property from products, books, and movies and pharmaceuticals totals tens of billions every year. Balance of payments. Another measure of international trade is called the balance of payments, which is a summary of a country's international financial transactions, showing the difference between the country's total payments to and its total receipts from other countries. The balance of payments includes imports and exports, balance of trade, long-term investments in overseas plants and equipment, government loans to and from other countries, gifts and foreign aid, military expenditures made in other countries, and money transfers in and out of foreign banks. From 1900 until 1970, the United States had a trade surplus, but in the other areas that make up the balance of payments, U.S. payments exceeded receipts, largely due to the large U.S. military presence abroad. Hence, almost every year since 1950, the United States has had an unfavorable balance of payments. And since 1970, both the balance of payments and the balance of trade have been unfavorable. What can a nation do to reduce an unfavorable balance of payments? It can foster exports, reduce its dependence on imports, decrease its military presence abroad, or reduce foreign investment. The U.S. balance of payments deficit was approximately $200 billion in 2025. The changing value of currencies. The exchange rate is the price of one country's currency in terms of another country's currency. If a country's currency appreciates, less of that country's currency is needed to buy another country's currency. If a country's currency depreciates, more of that currency will be needed to buy another country's currency. How do appreciation and depreciation affect the prices of a country's goods? If, say, the US dollar depreciates relative to the Japanese yen, US residents have to pay more dollars to buy Japanese goods. To illustrate, suppose the dollar price of a yen is $0.0065 and that a Toyota is priced at 2 million yen. At this exchange rate, a US resident pays just under $13,000 for a Toyota. If the dollar depreciates to $0.012 to 1 yen, then the US resident will have to pay $24,000 for a Toyota. As the dollar depreciates, the prices of Japanese goods rise for US residents, so they buy fewer Japanese goods. Thus, US imports decline. At the same time, as the dollar depreciates relative to the yen appreciates relative to the dollar. This means prices of US goods fall for the Japanese, so they buy more US goods, and US exports rise. Currency markets operate under a system called floating exchange rates. Prices of currencies float up and down based upon the demand for and supply of each currency. Global currency traders create the supply of and demand for a particular currency based on that currency's investment, trade potential, and economic strength. If a country decides that its currency is not properly valued in international currency markets, the government may step in and adjust the currency's value. In a devaluation, a nation lowers the value of its currency relative to other currencies. This makes that country's exports cheaper and should in turn help the balance of payments. In other cases, a country's currency may be undervalued, giving its exports an unfair competitive advantage. Many people believe that China's huge trade surplus with the United States is partially because China's currency was undervalued. Countries can impact their exchange rate through fiscal policies and through buying and selling large amounts of its currency. This prompts the country's currency to be undervalued, giving exports an unfair competitive advantage. Countries such as China, Japan, and Switzerland have been accused of manipulating their currencies to increase the attractiveness of their exports.
Concept check. 1. What is global vision and why is it important? 2. What impact does international trade have on the U.S. economy? 3. Explain the impact of a currency devaluation.
3.2 Why nations trade? Learning objective. Why do nations trade?
One might argue that the best way to protect workers and the domestic economy is to stop trade with other nations. Then the whole circular flow of inputs and outputs would stay within our borders. But if we decided to do that, how would we get resources like cobalt and coffee beans? The United States simply can't produce some things, and it can't manufacture some products, such as steel and some clothing, at the low costs we're used to. The fact is that nations, like people, are good at producing different things. You may be better at financial services than developing an app. In that case, you benefit by exporting your financial services and importing the app development you need from a skilled programmer. Economists refer to specialization like this as advantage. Absolute advantage. A country has an absolute advantage when it can produce and sell a product at a lower cost than any other country, or when it is the only country that can provide a product. The United States, for example, has an absolute advantage in high-tech sectors. Suppose that the United States has an absolute advantage in air traffic control systems for busy airports, and that Brazil has an absolute advantage in coffee. The United States does not have the proper climate for growing coffee, and Brazil lacks the technology to develop air traffic control systems. Both countries would gain by exchanging air traffic control systems for coffee. Comparative advantage. Even if the United States had an absolute advantage in both coffee and air traffic control systems, it should still specialize and engage in trade. Why? The reason is the principle of comparative advantage, which says that each country should specialize in the products that it can produce most readily and cheaply, and trade those products for goods that foreign countries can produce most readily and cheaply. This specialization ensures greater product availability and lower prices. For example, India and Vietnam have a comparative advantage in producing clothing because of lower labor costs. Japan has long held a comparative advantage in consumer electronics because of technological expertise. The United States has an advantage in computer software, airplanes, some agricultural products, heavy machinery, and jet engines. Thus, comparative advantage acts as a stimulus to trade. When nations allow their citizens to trade whatever goods and services they choose without government regulation, free trade exists. Free trade is the policy of permitting the people and businesses of a country to buy and sell where they please, without restrictions. The opposite of free trade is protectionism, in which a nation protects its home industries from outside competition by establishing artificial barriers such as tariffs and quotas. In the next section, we'll look at the various barriers, some natural and some created by governments, that restrict free trade. Concerns about trade and globalization. Protests at meetings of groups such as the World Trade Organization, World Bank, and the International Monetary Fund, the organizations are discussed later in the chapter, provide some evidence that there is concern about world trade and globalization. What are the concerns? The negatives of global trade are as follows. It has been reported that millions of Americans have lost jobs due to imports or production operations shifting abroad. Many can find new positions, but sometimes not at the same pay they previously earned. Millions of others fear losing their jobs, especially at those companies operating under competitive pressure. Employees fear that firms will export their jobs if they do not work for lower wages or agree to pay cuts. Service industry jobs, such as IT and customer service, are increasingly vulnerable to operations moving offshore. Sending domestic jobs to another country is called outsourcing, a topic you can explore in more depth. Many U.S. companies, such as JP Morgan Chase, Comcast, and Verizon, have set up call centers in India, the Philippines, and other countries. Now, even engineering and research and development jobs are being outsourced. Outsourcing, the trade deficit, and the labor market are highly debated issues that are often the topic of political debates. Additionally, U.S. jobs and trade are frequently significant components of both state and national elections. Through government interventions, in some cases, jobs can be retained in the United States. There are many factors that are considered by firms when deciding to move jobs or functions overseas. It is important to remember that the economic factors work in conjunction with the firm's needs. In some cases, the business needs push the company to globalize. So, is outsourcing good or bad? If you happen to lose your job, it's obviously bad for you. However, some economists say it leads to cheaper goods and services for U.S. consumers because costs are lower. Also, it should stimulate exports to fast-growing countries. No one knows how many jobs will be lost to outsourcing in coming years. According to estimates, over 4 million U.S. jobs were outsourced in 2025. Benefits of globalization. A closer look reveals that globalization has been the engine that creates jobs and wealth. Benefits of global trade include the following. Productivity grows more quickly when countries produce goods and services in which they have a comparative advantage. Living standards can increase faster. One problem is that big G20 countries have added nearly 2,300 restrictive export and import measures since 2008. Global competition and cheap imports keep prices down, so inflation is less likely to stop economic growth. However, in some cases this is not working because countries manipulate their currency to get a price advantage. An open economy spurs innovation with fresh ideas from abroad. Through infusion of foreign capital and technology, global trade provides lower-income countries with the chance to develop economically by spreading prosperity. More information is shared between two trading partners that may not have much in common initially, including insight into local cultures and customs, which may help the two nations expand their collective knowledge and learn ways to compete globally.
Concept check. 1. Describe the policy of free trade and its relationship to comparative advantage. 2. Why do people fear globalization? 3. What are the benefits of globalization?
3.3 Barriers to Trade. Learning objective. What are the barriers to international trade?
International trade is carried out by both businesses and governments, as long as no one puts up trade barriers. In general, trade barriers keep firms from selling to one another in foreign markets. The major obstacles to international trade are natural barriers, tariff barriers, and non-tariff barriers. Natural barriers. Natural barriers to trade can be either physical or cultural. For instance, even though raising beef in the Argentinian climate may cost less than raising beef in a colder climate such as Siberia, the cost of shipping the beef from Argentina to Siberia might drive the price too high. Distance is thus one of the natural barriers to international trade. Language is another natural trade barrier. People who can't communicate effectively may not be able to negotiate trade agreements, or may ship the wrong goods. Tariff barriers. A tariff is a tax imposed by a nation on imported goods. It may be a charge per unit, such as per barrel of oil or per new car. It may be a percentage of the value of the goods, such as 5% of a $500,000 shipment of shoes. Or it may be a combination. No matter how it is assessed, any tariff makes imported goods more costly, so they are less able to compete with domestic products. Protective tariffs make imported products less attractive to buyers than domestic products. The United States, for instance, has protective tariffs on imported agricultural goods, grain, dairy, meat, steel, and aluminum, and some plastics. Canada has imposed tariffs and quotas on U.S. dairy, poultry, and eggs that were as much as 245% in some cases. This was in an effort to protect Canadian producers of these products, to ensure farm profits. Arguments for and against tariffs. Congress has debated the issue of tariffs since 1789. The main arguments for tariffs include the following. Tariffs protect vulnerable industries by giving them time for their costs to become competitive globally. Tariffs can be instrumental in retaining business and production domestically, thus keeping jobs in the United States. Tariffs aid in military preparedness. Tariffs on industries and technology vital to military efforts during peacetime can protect these products/industries in the event of conflict. The main arguments against tariffs include the following. Tariffs interrupt free trade and the principle of competitive advantage, making markets less efficient. Tariffs can impact prices and decrease consumers' purchasing power. In 2025, the United States imposed a 50% global tariff, 25% for the UK, on steel. The idea was to give US steel manufacturers a fair market and to boost employment domestically in the steel and manufacturing industries. The effects of these tariffs are still playing out, but higher steel prices have been realized. Heavy users of steel, such as construction and transportation industries, have seen increases in their production costs. Non-tariff barriers. Governments also use other tools besides tariffs to restrict trade. One type of non-tariff barrier is the import quota, or limits on the quantity of a certain good that can be imported. The goal of setting quotas is to limit imports to the specific amount of a given product. The United States protects many commodity products, such as cotton, dairy products, and some textiles, with quotas. A complete list of the commodities and products subject to import quotas is available online at the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Agency website. A complete ban against importing or exporting a product is an embargo. Often embargoes are set up for defense purposes. For instance, the United States does not allow various high-tech products such as unmanned aerial vehicles, drones, or electronic intelligence surveillance systems to be exported abroad to some countries. Although this embargo costs U.S. firms billions of dollars each year in lost sales, it keeps enemies from using the latest technology in their military hardware. Government rules that give special privileges to domestic manufacturers and retailers are called binational regulations. One such regulation in the United States mandates that nearly all, at least 95%, of the iron and steel used in constructing highways must be produced domestically. Many state governments have binational rules for supplies and services. In a more subtle move, a country may make it hard for foreign products to enter its markets by establishing customs regulations that are different from generally accepted international standards, such as requiring bottles to be quart size rather than liter size. Exchange controls are laws that require a company earning foreign exchange, foreign currency, from its exports to sell the foreign exchange to a control agency, usually a central bank. For example, assume that Rolex, a Swiss company, sells 300 watches to Zales Jewelers, a US chain, for $600,000 US. If Switzerland had exchange controls, Rolex would have to sell its US dollars to the Swiss central bank and would receive Swiss francs. If Rolex wants to buy goods, supplies to make watches, from abroad, it must go to the central bank and buy foreign exchange, currency. By controlling the amount of foreign exchange sold to companies, the government controls the amount of products that can be imported. Limiting imports and encouraging exports helps a government to create a favorable balance of trade.
Concept check. 1. Discuss the concept of natural trade barriers. 2. Describe several tariff and non-tariff barriers to trade.
Three point 4. Fostering global trade. Learning objective. How do governments and institutions foster world trade?
Anti-dumping laws. U.S. firms don't always get to compete on an equal basis with foreign firms in international trade. To level the playing field, Congress has passed anti-dumping laws. Dumping is the practice of charging a lower price for a product, perhaps below cost, in foreign markets than in the firm's home market. The company might be trying to win foreign customers, or it might be seeking to get rid of surplus goods. When the variation in price can't be explained by differences in the cost of serving the two markets, dumping is suspected. Most industrialized countries have anti-dumping regulations. They are especially concerned about predatory dumping, the attempt to gain control of a foreign market by destroying competitors with impossibly low prices. For example, assume that a country was found to be pricing lumber nearly 10% below their costs to try to gain control of the market. The United States could respond with imposing a tariff on lumber from that country. Those tariffs could be as high as 30%, depending on the business, as a punitive measure against the country for their predatory dumping practices. From our discussion so far, it might seem that governments act only to restrain global trade. On the contrary, governments and international financial organizations work hard to increase it, as this section explains. Trade negotiations and the World Trade Organization. The Uruguay round of trade negotiations is an agreement that dramatically lowers trade barriers worldwide. Adopted in 1994, the agreement was signed by 123 nations and is now observed by the WTO's 166 participant countries. One of the more ambitious global trade agreements, the Uruguay round, reduced tariffs by 1/3 worldwide, a move that increased access for both consumers and producers to industrial goods. Perhaps the most notable aspect of the agreement is its recognition of new global realities. For the first time, an agreement covered services, intellectual property rights, and trade-related investment measures, such as exchange controls. As a follow-up to the Uruguay round, a negotiating round started in the capital of Qatar in 2001 is called the Doha round. The negotiations were not successful, and the Doha round was ended by 2017 after years of back-and-forth discussions. Some nations continue to advocate for trade reform, especially in the agriculture sector. These lower-income countries say that policies such as farm subsidies abroad stimulate overproduction, which drives down global agricultural prices. Because emerging market nations' primary exports are agricultural commodities, low prices mean that they cannot compete in the global marketplace. On the other hand, the United States and Europe are interested in bringing down trade barriers in services and manufacturing. The continuing talks have sustained the concerns of protesters, who claim that the World Trade Organization, WTO, serves the interests of multinational corporations, promotes trade over preserving the environment, and treats low-income nations unfairly. The World Trade Organization replaces the old General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT, which was created in 1948. The GATT contained extensive loopholes that enabled countries to evade agreements to reduce trade barriers. Today, all WTO members must fully comply with all agreements under the Uruguay round. The WTO also has an effective dispute settlement procedure with strict time limits to resolve disputes. The WTO has emerged as the world's most powerful institution for reducing trade barriers and opening markets. The advantage of WTO membership is that member countries lower trade barriers among themselves. Countries that don't belong must negotiate trade agreements individually with all their trading partners. Only a few countries, such as North Korea, Turkmenistan, and Eritrea, are not members of the WTO. The United States has had mixed results in bringing disputes before the WTO. To date, it has won about 70% of the cases it has presented to the WTO, but it has only won about 20% of the cases brought against it by other countries. One of America's losses came in a ruling where the U.S. claimed that tuna imported from Mexico was not meeting the dolphin-safe criteria that protects them during the commercial fishing of tuna. The United States has also filed cases against European countries, South Korea, India, Canada, and Argentina. The disputes ranged from European aviation practices to Indian trade barriers affecting U.S. automakers. One of the larger and longest disputes that was brought before the WTO involved the United States and the European Union. The dispute was filed in 2004 and lasted nearly 20 years. The United States claimed that Europe gave Airbus $15 billion in aid to develop airplanes. The European Union, in response, claimed that the U.S. government provided $23 billion in military research that has benefited Boeing's commercial aircraft business. It also claimed that the state of Washington, headquarter location of Boeing, has given the company over $3 billion in unfair tax breaks. There were retaliatory measures enacted on both sides during the dispute. The case was finally resolved with a negotiated settlement that included a commitment to work together on issues surrounding the large aircraft sector. The World Bank and International Monetary Fund. Two international financial organizations are instrumental in fostering global trade. The World Bank offers low-interest loans to developing nations. Originally, the purpose of the loans was to help these nations build infrastructure such as roads, power plants, schools, drainage projects, and hospitals. Now, the World Bank offers loans to help developing nations relieve their debt burdens. To receive the loans, countries must pledge to lower trade barriers and aid private enterprise. In addition to making loans, the World Bank is a major source of advice and information for developing nations. The United States has granted the organization millions to create knowledge databases on nutrition, family planning, engineering and technology, product development, and business management practices. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, was founded in 1945, 1 year after the creation of the World Bank, to promote trade through financial cooperation and eliminate trade barriers in the process. The IMF makes short-term loans to member nations that are unable to meet their budgetary expenses. It operates as a lender of last resort for troubled nations. In exchange for these emergency loans, IMF lenders frequently extract significant commitments from the borrowing nations to address the problems that led to the crises. These steps may include curtailing imports or even devaluing the currency. Some global financial problems do not have a simple solution. One option would be to pump a lot more funds into the IMF, giving it enough resources to bail out troubled countries and put them back on their feet. In effect, the IMF would be turned into a real lender of last resort for the world economy. The danger of counting on the IMF, though, is the moral hazard problem. Investors would assume that the IMF would bail them out, and would therefore be encouraged to take bigger and bigger risks in emerging markets, leading to the possibility of even deeper financial crises in the future.
Concept check. 1. Describe the purpose and role of the WTO. 2. What are the roles of the World Bank and the IMF in world trade?
3.5 International Economic Communities. Learning objective. What are international economic communities?
Nations that frequently trade with each other may decide to formalize their relationship. The governments meet and work out agreements for a common economic policy. The result is an economic community, or, in other cases, a bilateral trade agreement, an agreement between two countries to lower trade barriers. For example, two nations may agree upon a preferential tariff, which gives advantages to one nation, or several nations, over others. When member countries of the EU trade with each other, they pay lower, or even zero, tariffs than do other nations. For example, there are no tariffs on steel when traded within the European Union. However, when trading outside of the EU, imported steel from an EU country into the United States is subject to a 50% tariff. In other cases, nations may form free trade associations. In a free trade zone, few duties or rules restrict trade among the partners, but nations outside the zone must pay the tariffs set by the individual members. North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA. The North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, created the world's largest free trade zone. The agreement was ratified by the U.S. Congress in 1993. It includes Canada, the United States, and Mexico, with a combined population of 510 million and an economy of over $30.9 trillion. NAFTA has since been replaced by the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, which went into effect on July 1st, 2020. Canada, one of the largest U.S. trading partners, entered a free trade agreement with the United States in 1988. Thus, most of the new long-run opportunities opened for U.S. business under NAFTA are in Mexico, America's third-largest trading partner. Before NAFTA, tariffs on Mexican exports to the United States averaged just 4%, and most goods entered the United States duty-free. So NAFTA's primary impact was to open the Mexican market to U.S. companies. When the treaty went into effect, tariffs on about half the items traded across the Rio Grande disappeared. Since NAFTA, now USMCA, came into effect, U.S.-Mexican trade has increased from $80 billion to over $750 billion annually. The agreement removed several barriers to trade, including licensing requirements, quotas, and tariffs that limited transactions in the countries for goods and services. For example, the agreement allows U.S. and Canadian financial services companies to own subsidiaries in Mexico, which had long been previously prohibited. The real test of USMCA will be whether it can deliver rising prosperity on both sides of the Rio Grande. To be effective, the agreement needs to provide rising wages and benefits and increased purchasing power to Mexico, so it will continue to buy goods from the U.S. and Canada. At the Delphi Corp. Auto parts plant in Ciudad Juarez, just across the border from El Paso, Texas. The assembly line is a cross-section of working-class Mexico. In the years since NAFTA lowered trade and investment barriers, Delphi has significantly expanded its presence in the country and has restructured into multiple entities that employ thousands and receive millions of US-made components to assemble into parts. The wages are modest by US standards. An assembly line worker with 2 years' experience earns about $4 to $6 per hour, but that's much higher than Mexico's minimum wage of around $2.50 per hour, making these positions highly coveted. One of the largest new trade agreements is Mercosur, which includes Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay as full members. The elimination of most tariffs among the trading partners has resulted in trade revenues that exceed $80 billion annually. Economic conditions have impacted some growth, but trade among Mercosur countries has continued to grow. Another relatively recent trade agreement is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. This trade agreement includes 15 Asian states and signals to investors that the region is still committed to multilateral trade integration. One item that is most notable about this trade agreement is that the U.S. is not a member. Central America Free Trade Agreement. Another key free trade agreement is the Central America Free Trade Agreement, CAFTA, passed in 2005. Besides the United States, the agreement includes Costa Rica, the Dominican Republic, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua. As the United States was already a principal exporter to these nations, there has not been a major increase in U.S. exports. However, the agreement did reduce tariffs on exports to CAFTA countries. Nearly all of the goods imported into the United States from CAFTA nations are tariff-free. Additional benefits can be realized as U.S. multinational firms deepen investment in the region. The European Union. In 1993, the member countries of the European Community, EC, ratified the Maastricht Treaty, which proposed to take the EC further toward economic, monetary, and political union. Although the heart of the treaty deals with developing a unified European market, Maastricht was also intended to increase integration among European Union (EU) members. The EU has helped increase this integration by creating a borderless economy for the 27 European nations. European Union member states have set up common institutions to which they delegate some of their sovereignty, so that decisions on specific matters of joint interest can be made democratically at the European level. This pooling of sovereignty is also called European integration. On January 31st, 2020, the United Kingdom formally withdrew from the European Union, more commonly known as Brexit. One of the principal objectives of the European Union is to promote economic progress of all member countries. The EU has stimulated economic progress by eliminating trade barriers, differences in tax laws, and differences in product standards, and by establishing a common currency. A new European Community Bank was created, along with a common currency called the euro. The European Union's single market has prompted a growth in the labor force to over 221 million and more than an 85% increase in GDP per capita, just since 2024. Under pressure of competition, the prices of airfares in Europe have fallen, and passengers from the EU are entitled to compensation when flights are significantly delayed. The removal of national restrictions has enabled millions of Europeans to go to other EU countries to work or spend their retirement. The EU utilizes a tough two-tier antitrust enforcement system. In 2026, the EU fined X, formerly Twitter, $140 million for deceptive practices. They have also opened investigations against Alphabet and Meta. Unlike in the United States, the EU can seal off corporate offices for unspecified periods to prevent destruction of evidence and enter the homes, cars, yachts, and other personal property of executives suspected of abusing their company's market power or conspiring to fix prices. Microsoft has been at odds with the EU since 2020 regarding the bundling of their product, Teams, with Office 365 licenses. The complaint was brought by a competitor, Slack, who asserted that the act forced customers to use the product and hid the true cost. The dispute was settled in late 2025 when Microsoft agreed to unbundle Teams from the Office suite, and it now is purchased as a separate product. Another big US company, Coca-Cola, agreed to revise its packaging regarding recycling content in response to a complaint filed by a consumer that the company's statements were misleading. Previously, the company agreed to limits on its sales tactics by not signing exclusive agreements with retailers to ban competing brands or give retailers rebates based on the sales volume of their products. They also agreed to give competitors space in their branded coolers. Violations of these agreements will result in fines that could be in the billions. Another key issue facing global businesses is the industry protectionist measures enacted by the EU against imports. For example, anti-dumping tariffs, quotas, and technical barriers to trade have all been enacted not only to regulate trade from outside the EU, but also to create a more equitable trade environment within EU countries. The member countries do not always agree on the tactics used, as each considers its own economy and the impact such measures like quotas and tariffs will have on producers and consumers. Interestingly, a number of large US companies have a stronger foothold in Europe than some European companies. Coke and Kellogg's are considered classic European brand names. Apple, Microsoft, and Alphabet dominate in their markets, while General Electric and AT&T are strong brands all over Europe.
Concept check. 1. Explain the pros and cons of NAFTA. 2. What is the European Union? Will it ever be a United States of Europe?
Three 3.6. Participating in the global marketplace. Learning objective. How do companies enter the global marketplace?
Companies decide to go global for a number of reasons. Perhaps the most urgent reason is to earn additional profits. If a firm has a unique product or technological advantage not available to other international competitors, this advantage should result in major business successes abroad. In other situations, management may have exclusive market information about foreign customers, marketplaces, or market situations. In this case, although exclusivity can provide an initial motivation for going global, managers must realize that competitors will eventually catch up. Finally, saturated domestic markets. Excess capacity and potential for cost savings can also be motivators to expand into international markets. A company can enter global trade in several ways, as this section describes. Exporting. When a company decides to enter the global market, usually the least complicated and least risky alternative is exporting, or selling domestically produced products to buyers in another country. A company, for example, can sell directly to foreign importers or buyers. Exporting is not limited to huge corporations such as Caterpillar or Intel. Indeed, small companies typically enter the global marketplace by exporting. China is the world's largest exporter, followed by the United States. Many small businesses claim that they lack the money, time, or knowledge of foreign markets that exporting requires. The U.S. Small Business Administration, SBA, now offers the Export Working Capital Program, which helps small and medium-sized firms obtain working capital, money, to complete export sales. The SBA also provides counseling and legal assistance for small businesses that wish to enter the global marketplace. Companies such as American Building Restoration Products of Franklin, Wisconsin, have benefited tremendously from becoming exporters. American Building is now selling its chemical products to building restoration companies in Mexico, Israel, Japan, and Korea. Exports account for more than 5% of the firm's total sales. Government assistance and education is available when a company decides to begin exporting. Export Assistance Centers, EAC, provide a one-stop resource for help in exporting. Around 150 EACs are located in major cities and trade hubs around the country. Often, the SBA is located in the same building as the EAC. The SBA can guarantee loans of up to $5 million to help an exporter grow its business. Online help is also available at www.ustr.gov. The site lists international trade events, offers international marketing research, and has practical tools to help with every step of the exporting process. Companies considering exporting for the first time can go to www.export.gov and get answers to questions such as, what's in it for me? Am I ready for this? What do I have to do? The site also provides a huge list of resources for the first-time exporter. Licensing and franchising. Another effective way for a firm to move into the global arena with relatively little risk is to sell a license to manufacture its product to a firm in a foreign country. Licensing is the legal process whereby a firm, the licensor, agrees to let another firm, the licensee, use a manufacturing process, trademark, patent, trade secret, or other proprietary knowledge. The licensee, in turn, agrees to pay the licensor a royalty or fee agreed on by both parties. International licensing is a multi-billion-dollar-a-year industry. Technology/patent, trademark, and character licensing, such as Batman or Marvel Comics characters, are strong sources of revenue in the licensing sector. Caterpillar licenses its brand for both shoes and clothing, which is very popular in Europe. US companies have eagerly embraced the licensing concept. For instance, Disney's Epcot entered into a licensing agreement with General Motors to create a Chevy-themed attraction at the park. The Spalding Company receives more than $2 million annually from license agreements on its sporting goods. Fruit of the Loom lends its name through licensing to 45 consumer items in Japan alone for at least 1% of the licensee's gross sales. The licensor must make sure it can exercise sufficient control over the licensee's activities to ensure proper quality, pricing, distribution, and so on. Licensing may also create a new competitor in the long run if the licensee decides to void the license agreement. International law is often ineffective in stopping such actions. Two common ways that a licensor can maintain effective control over its licensees are by shipping one or more critical components from the United States and by locally registering patents and trademarks in its own name. Franchising is a popular form of licensing. U.S. franchisors operate thousands of outlets across the world. Approximately half of the international franchisors are for fast food restaurants and business services. Having a big-name franchise doesn't always guarantee success or mean that the job will be easy. For example, Home Depot opened 12 stores across 6 different cities in Asia and closed them all in less than 10 years from opening. This was in large part due to the lack of adaptation to the culture. Had they done more market research, they would have better understood the target customer and their needs. Those needs, vastly different from a US consumer, included certain stylistic choices and less physically demanding projects. When Subway opened its first sandwich shop in China, it faced numerous challenges, many of which were cultural differences. Patrons were not accustomed to the ordering procedures and were unsure of the quality of the ingredients, which were presented differently than they were used to seeing in markets. The cold sandwich concept was not part of the Chinese food culture, and the price point was too high. However, with time, the company adapted their approach and menu offerings to better appeal to the local market. The franchise has grown, and in 2025 they opened their 1,000th location in China, with aggressive plans to open more stores in the future. It's not unusual for Western food chains to adapt their strategies when selling in China. In popular chains such as McDonald's and KFC, it is commonplace to see unique menu offerings that appeal to the local market that consumers will not see in U.S. locations. Contract manufacturing. In contract manufacturing, a foreign firm manufactures private label goods under a domestic firm's brand. Marketing may be handled by either the domestic company or the foreign manufacturer. Levi Strauss, for instance, entered into an agreement with the French fashion house of Cacharel to produce a new Levi's line, something new, for distribution in Germany. The advantage of contract manufacturing is that it lets a company test the water in a foreign country. By allowing the foreign firm to produce a certain volume of products to specification and put the domestic firm's brand name on the goods, the domestic firm can broaden its global marketing base without investing in overseas plants and equipment. After establishing a solid base, the domestic firm may switch to a joint venture or direct investment, explained below. Joint ventures. Joint ventures are somewhat similar to licensing agreements. In a joint venture, the domestic firm buys part of a foreign company or joins with a foreign company to create a new entity. A joint venture is a quick and relatively inexpensive way to enter the global market. It can also be very risky. Many joint ventures fail. Others fall victim to a takeover, in which one partner buys out the other. Sometimes, countries have required local partners in order to establish a business in their country. China once had this requirement, and during that time, a joint venture was the only way to enter the market. Joint ventures help reduce risks by sharing costs and technology. Often, joint ventures will bring together different strengths from each member. In a now dissolved joint venture between General Motors and Suzuki in Canada, ended in 2011, both parties contributed and gained. The alliance, CAMI Automotive, was formed to manufacture low-end cars for the U.S. market. The plant, which was run by Suzuki management, produced several GM models as well as the new Suzuki SUV. Through CAMI, Suzuki gained access to GM's dealer network and expanded their market for parts and components. GM avoided the cost of developing lower-end models and obtained models it needed to expand its offerings to consumers of various demographics and revitalize its average fuel economy rating. The CAMI factory, now fully owned by GM, is a highly productive plant in North America. Through GM's acquisition of Japanese work teams, flexible assembly lines, and efficient quality control measures. Direct foreign investment. Active ownership of a foreign company or of overseas manufacturing or marketing facilities is direct foreign investment. Direct investors have either a controlling interest or a large minority interest in the firm. Thus, they stand to receive the greatest potential reward, but also face the greatest potential risk. A firm may make a direct foreign investment by acquiring an interest in an existing company or by building new facilities. It might do so because it has trouble transferring some resources to a foreign operation or obtaining that resource locally. One important resource is personnel, especially managers. If the local labor market is tight, the firm may buy an entire foreign firm and retain all its employees instead of paying higher salaries than competitors. Sometimes firms make direct investments because they can find no suitable local partners. Also, direct investments avoid the communication problems and conflicts of interest that can arise with joint ventures. IBM, in the past, insisted on total ownership of its foreign investments because it did not want to share control with local partners. But today, it utilizes joint ventures, partnerships, and strategic alliances. Walmart now has around 5,300 stores located outside of the United States. In 2025, international sales were over $150 billion. Walmart's expansion strategy has shifted toward e-commerce over physical stores, as they look to grow their presence in global markets. Not all of Walmart's global investments have been successful. In the late 1990s, Walmart entered the German market by purchasing two existing retail chains, Wertkauf and Interspar. Many factors contributed to the failure of the initiative, including cultural differences as Walmart attempted to replicate the American Walmart experience in the German locations. Additional roadblocks included differences in management styles, restrictions on operating hours, customer loyalty to existing stores, and negative press around labor issues. By 2006, Walmart left Germany with about $1 billion in financial losses. Walmart has turned the corner on its international operations. It is pushing operational authority down to country managers in order to respond better to local cultures. Walmart enforces certain core principles, such as everyday low prices, but country managers handle their own buying, logistics, building design, and other operational decisions. Global firms change their strategies as local market conditions evolve. For example, major oil companies have to continue to react and adapt to changes in the price of oil due to technological advances.
Managing change. Managing fluctuating oil prices. In 2014, crude oil was $90 a barrel, but increased production due to the shale oil boom and the reluctance of OPEC countries to reduce output led to a price drop to $45 to $60 throughout the first quarter of 2015. While this is terrific news for consumers, it does provide challenges to managers at both large and small companies. Connected to the oil industry, the companies in the oil industry saw dramatic reductions in their earnings in 2015, which was also reflected in lower stock prices. The action taken by senior executives at Chevron was to trim their planned capital expenditures by $5 billion in 2016, resulting in the elimination of 1,500 jobs. While then ExxonMobil executives Jeff Woodbury, retired in 2018, and CEO Rex Tillerson, retired as of 2016, and now the former U.S. Secretary of State, were less specific. They planned several cost-saving strategies built around several years of low oil prices. Likewise, Ben van Beurden, then CEO of Royal Dutch Shell, retired in 2023, announced plans to reduce their workforce and planned for expected lower oil prices. Since 2016, inflation-adjusted oil prices per barrel have fluctuated widely from a low of less than $20 in 2020 to a high of nearly $120 per barrel in 2022. Since 2000, the inflation-adjusted average price has hovered around $80 per barrel. These wide fluctuations make it necessary for those firms in the industry to be resilient and to pivot when necessary to deal with the challenges of rapidly changing conditions. In addition to layoffs, actions that oil company managers can employ include mergers for companies that don't have the ability to become fully efficient themselves. They can merge with other companies that can improve overall efficiencies in operations. Contrary to the cost-cutting plans mentioned earlier, some companies might consider increasing their spending plans. Going against the reduced expenditures trend is Oventive, formerly Encana, a North American oil producer, which instead increased its overall spending during the 2014 to 2016 years. Some of the factors that allowed the firm to increase spending was its low debt-to-equity ratio and its growth, which exceeded the industry average. Growth is an important component of a company's strategy, and reactive short-term strategies can often hurt long-term growth. By implementing performance improvement programs, companies can address problems and inefficiencies within the company and allow them to focus on innovation. Another strategy that companies can use is to review and alter their supply chain by focusing on costs and efficiency. Companies can expand their supplier base, thus increasing competition and reducing costs. This also requires companies to embrace a lean manufacturing mindset. New technology can also be used as a cost driver. New technologies such as AI and machine learning are being used for preventative maintenance, reservoir management, and for improving exploration and drilling, all of which can lead to increased production. Adopting new technology can also lead to changes in the workers that companies employ. New technology impacts the types of skills and training needed in the workforce. The fluctuations in oil prices continue to be a challenge for energy companies. The companies that employ multiple strategies to improve efficiency are the ones that will survive and prosper. Critical thinking questions. 1. Do you think that Royal Dutch Shell and ExxonMobil would have been more successful if they had considered strategies other than cutting spending and eliminating jobs? Why or why not? 2. How should oil companies react if oil prices rise to the $90 to $100 per barrel level? Explain your reasoning.
Countertrade. International trade does not always involve cash. Today, countertrade is a fast-growing way to conduct international business. In countertrade, part or all of the payment for goods or services is in the form of other goods or services. Countertrade is a form of barter, swapping goods for goods, an age-old practice whose origins have been traced back through history. Estimates are that between 5 and 15% of all international trade involves countertrade. The practice is primarily used in emerging markets and nations. Many U.S. companies, including Fortune 500 firms, barter billions of goods and services every year. For example, China and the Malaysian government reached a barter deal to exchange Malaysian palm oil for construction and natural resources products, along with civilian equipment.
Concept check. 1. Discuss several ways that a company can enter international trade. 2. Explain the concept of counter trade.
3.7 Threats and Opportunities in the Global Marketplace. Learning objective: what threats and opportunities exist in the global marketplace?
To be successful in a foreign market, companies must fully understand the foreign environment in which they plan to operate. Politics, cultural differences, and the economic environment can represent both opportunities and pitfalls in the global marketplace. Political considerations. We have already discussed how tariffs, exchange controls, and other governmental actions threaten foreign producers. The political structure of a country may also jeopardize a foreign producer's success in international trade. Intense nationalism, for example, can lead to difficulties. Nationalism is the sense of national consciousness that boosts the culture and interests of one country over those of all other countries. Countries with high levels of nationalism, such as Vietnam and Finland, often discourage investment by foreign companies. In other forms of nationalism, the government may take actions to hinder foreign operations. France, for example, requires pop music stations to play at least 40% of their songs in French. This law was enacted because the French love American rock and roll. Without airtime, American music sales suffer. In another example of nationalism, US-based PPG made an unsolicited bid to acquire a Netherlands-based firm. There was opposition from Dutch politicians to the idea of a foreign takeover of a domestic paint manufacturer, and the government expressed support for preventing the hostile takeover event. The Dutch firm took to social media to bolster support for their rejection of the takeover attempt. PPG dropped its efforts to take over the company just a month after announcing their interest. In a hostile climate, a government may expropriate a foreign company's assets, taking ownership and compensating the former owners. Perhaps a more severe tactic is confiscation, when the owner receives no compensation. Historically, this has happened during wartime conflicts such as the Civil War and World War II. Cultural differences. Central to any society is the common set of values shared by its citizens that determine what is socially acceptable. Culture underlies the family, educational system, religion, and social class system. The network of social organizations generates overlapping roles and status positions. These values and roles have a tremendous effect on people's preferences and thus on marketers' options. For example, in China, Walmart holds live fishing contests on the premises. And in South Korea, the company hosts a food competition with variations on a popular Korean dish, kimchi. Language is another important aspect of culture. Marketers must take care in selecting product names and translating slogans and promotional messages so as not to convey the wrong meaning. For example, there are several cases of product names that, when translated into the local language, are off-putting or derogatory. Mitsubishi Motors had to rename its Pajero model in some Spanish-speaking countries because of the meaning of the word in Spanish. Toyota Motors' MR2 model dropped the 2 in France because the combination sounds like a French swear word. The literal translation of Coca-Cola in Chinese characters means "bite the wax tadpole." Each country has its own customs and traditions that determine business practices and influence negotiations with foreign customers. For example, doing business in many European countries can be difficult during the month of August. Many, if not most businesses, completely closed for the better part of the month. In many countries, personal relationships are more important than financial considerations. For instance, not attending a social engagement invitation in Mexico could lead to a lost sale. Negotiations in Japan can include things such as dining and entertaining, to develop the personal relationship first before working through a business deal. We will now present some cultural do's and don'ts.
Cultural do's and don'ts, guidelines, and examples. You should do the following.
Always receive and present business cards in Asian countries with both hands. Be sure to accept a business card with care, as opposed to quickly putting it away. Use a more subtle approach when promoting a product in Japan, as opposed to hard sell tactics. Build trust and confidence in both you and the product or service you are selling through careful listening and attention to their needs. Understand the role of religion in business transactions. In the Muslim religion, Ramadan is a holy month when most people fast. In majority Muslim countries or industries, this is a time when everything slows down, particularly business. Have a local person available to culturally and linguistically interpret any advertising that you plan to do.
You should not do the following.
Don't overuse hand gestures, backslapping, or first names on your first business meeting in Asia. If you do, you will not garner the same respect as if you were more formal in your approach. Don't discuss your personal life at a business dinner with the French. Business professionals in France keep a strong boundary between their work and personal lives. Don't arrive late to a meeting in Germany. Punctuality is highly valued, and arriving a few minutes early is expected.
Economic environment. The level of economic development varies considerably, ranging from countries where meeting basic needs can be a challenge, such as Sudan and Eritrea, to industrialized countries such as Switzerland and Greece. In general, complex, more technologically advanced industries are found in higher income nations, and more traditional industries centered on natural resources are found in lower income nations. Average family incomes are higher in the more industrialized countries than in the less developed and emerging market economies. Larger incomes mean greater purchasing power and demand, not only for consumer goods and services, but also for the machinery and workers required to produce consumer goods. Business opportunities are usually better in countries that have an economic infrastructure in place. Infrastructure is the basic institutions and public facilities upon which an economy's development depends. In the US, for example, when we consider how our own economy works, we tend to take our infrastructure for granted. It includes the financial system that provides the major investment loans to our nation's businesses, the educational system that turns out the incredible varieties of skills and basic research that actually run our nation's production lines, the extensive communications networks, interstate highways, railroads, airports, canals, telecommunication networks, Wi-Fi and fiber optic internet access, streaming networks, shipping and mail service, and public transportation systems that link almost every piece of our geography into one market. The energy and utility distribution networks that power our factories, and of course, the market system itself, which brings our nation's goods and services into our homes and businesses. Table 3.2 provides a glimpse of global wealth, which is determined in part by gross national income. Gross national income is the value of the final goods and services produced by a country, gross domestic product, together with its income received from other countries, such as interest and dividends, less similar payments made to other countries. Final goods are the goods ultimately consumed rather than used in the production of another good. For example, a car sold to a consumer is a final good. The components, such as tires sold to the car manufacturer, are not. They are intermediate goods used to make the final good. However, those same tires could be considered a final good if sold directly to the consumer separately. In that case, the intermediate goods would be the rubber and materials used to produce the tire.
Concept check. 1. Explain how political factors can affect international trade. 2. Describe several cultural factors that a company involved in international trade should consider. 3. How can economic conditions affect trade opportunities?
3.8. The impact of multinational corporations. Learning objective. What are the advantages of multinational corporations?
Corporations that move resources, goods, services, and skills across national boundaries without regard to the country in which their headquarters are located are multinational corporations. Some rival small countries in terms of size and income. For example, the market value of Home Depot is equivalent to the GDP of Malaysia, and United Health Group is approximately 5 times the GPD of Luxembourg. Multinational companies are heavily engaged in international trade. The successful ones take political and cultural differences into account. Many global brands sell much more outside the United States than at home. Coca-Cola, Philip Morris's Marlboro brand, Pepsi, Kellogg, Pampers, Nescafe, and Gillette are examples. The Fortune 500 made over $2.3 trillion in profit in 2025. In slow-growing, developed economies like Germany and the Netherlands, a weaker dollar helps because it means cheaper products to sell into those markets, and profits earned in those markets translate into more dollars back home. Meanwhile, emerging markets such as Bangladesh, India, and Brazil are growing steadily. General Electric generated about 1/3 of its revenue from Asia, the Middle East, and Africa in 2025. Brown-Forman, the spirits company, is targeting emerging markets to grow its distribution of Jack Daniel's. Nearly 20% of IBM's 2025 revenues came from Asia, with another 30% from Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. The largest multinational corporations in the world are shown in Table 3.3. In some markets, such as India and Brazil, research indicates that consumers are losing trust in American brands, and those brands are seeing double drops in intent to purchase compared to non-American brands. The multinational advantage. Large multinationals have several advantages over other companies. Taiwan and South Korea, for example, had long-standing embargoes against Japanese cars for political reasons and to help their domestic automakers. As the economic and political climates have shifted, along with pressure from the World Trade Organization and increasing consumer demand for Japanese vehicles, these restrictions have largely been lifted. In another example, BASF, a major chemical drug manufacturer in Germany, moved its cancer and immune system research to Cambridge, Massachusetts, in response to concerns about biotechnology research processes. Another advantage for multinationals is their ability to sidestep regulatory problems. For example, global pharmaceutical firms often deal with different and sometimes conflicting environmental and safety regulations. To manage these differing regulatory issues, companies often choose to move manufacturing to countries with fewer and less stringent regulations. They then keep their research and development activities in countries that have more protections for intellectual property. Multinationals can also shift production from one plant to another as market conditions change. For example, when European demand shifted for a solvent, Dow Chemical then shifted its German plant's manufacturing to a chemical that had been imported from the United States. Computer models help Dow make decisions like these so it can run its plants more efficiently and keep costs down. Multinationals can also tap new technology from around the world. Volvo and the Chinese car brand Geely joined and created Link & Company through the sharing of technologies across borders. Their new venture launched a hybrid SUV called the 01 that became available in 2021 in Europe. Versions of the super concentrated detergent that Procter & Gamble first formulated in Japan in response to a rival's product are now being sold under the Gain and Tide labels in the United States. Also, consider Otis Elevator's development of the Elevonic 411, an elevator that is programmed to send more cars to floors where demand is high. It was developed by 6 research centers in 5 countries. Otis's group in Farmington, Connecticut, handled the systems integration. A Japanese group designed the special motor drives that make the elevators ride smoothly. A French group perfected the door systems. A German group handled the electronics, and a Spanish group took care of the small geared components. The elevator was in production until the mid-2010s, when it was replaced with newer technologies. Nonetheless, this example shows how multinational corporations can leverage joint ventures and partnerships to bring products to the marketplace more efficiently and more quickly while saving money. Multinationals can often save a good deal in costs, even labor costs. For example, when Volvo and Geely joined forces, they leveraged their purchasing power by jointly procuring items such as batteries and motors. They worked together to develop the autonomous driving technology used in their vehicles. Finally, they shared electrified components to manage costs and to facilitate quicker development times, all the while maintaining independent corporate structures.
Expanding around the globe. U.S. brands face global competition. America is the cradle of the consumer goods brand. Here, a free spending and marketing saturated public nurtured Costco, Dell, Ford, Microsoft, and countless others to maturity. Many of those brands grew to break into other markets as well. Although still strong, American brands show some evidence of losing popularity in the global marketplace. Firms such as Samsung and Toyota, as well as product lines in the food, clothing, and personal wellness sectors, are gaining on American brands as they turn out top-quality goods and sell them at that price point rather than trying to compete on price alone. There are longer-term trends toward greater competition. The United States was the only global brand country. That's no longer the case, says Earl L. Taylor, Chief Knowledge Officer of the Marketing Science Institute. Consumers prefer brands that they take to be of higher quality, regardless of the country of origin, he notes. Increasingly, there will be other successful global brands in the U.S. market. Of the brands at the top of Interbrand's 2025 list of the world's most valuable, 4 of the top 5 still originate in the United States. The 5 most valuable are Apple, Google, Coca-Cola, Amazon, and Microsoft. American companies have lost ground because countries have been replacing U.S. products with those originating from other countries. This is in part due to lack of cultural adaptation of products and a loss of trust in American brands. One area from which U.S. brands are feeling the pressure is the Asia-Pacific region, which harbors the fastest-growing emerging markets today. In the appliance category, Chinese company Haier is a major player in the industry and is a top competitor for well-known U.S. brands like Whirlpool. In fact, Haier bought GE's appliance division in 2016. The Chinese branding trend is not confined only to hard goods. Sporting goods and sportswear brand Li Ning, well known within China, is building its international profile. While the Chinese basketball team wore Nike uniforms at the Athens Olympic Games, the Spanish team wore Li Ning apparel. The threat to U.S. brands is not confined to China, however. South Korean brands, such as Samsung, LG, and Hyundai, have emerged on the global stage in specific categories, such as smartphones, household appliances, and automobiles. Perceptions toward the United States have translated into a preference for European or Asian brands. These competing brands have garnered some of the U.S. market share in many categories, and their products are viewed as higher quality than some U.S. brands. Meanwhile, European brands are gaining momentum in the areas of household and consumer goods, putting the pressure on such well-known U.S. brands as Bissell and Hoover, experts say. For instance, Gaggenau is a popular, high-end European kitchen appliance brand, along with Bosch, AEG, and Bertazzoni. Other European brands recognizable in the U.S. market as well include Absolute, Virgin, Mini, as in Cooper, Red Bull, and IKEA. Critical thinking questions. 1. What can U.S. multinational firms do to grow their leadership in global branding? In which sectors and product areas are U.S. brands gaining share? 2. Why do you think there is a perception that the quality of American products is declining? Give an example of a product as you explain your position.
Concept check. 1. What is a multinational corporation? 2. What are the advantages of multinationals?
3.9. Trends in global competition. Learning objective. What are the trends in the global marketplace?
In this section, we will examine several underlying trends that will continue to propel growth in world trade. These trends are market expansion, resource acquisition, and growth in China and India. Market expansion. The need for businesses to expand their markets is perhaps the most fundamental reason for the growth in world trade. The limited size of domestic markets often motivates corporations to seek markets beyond their national borders. The economies of large-scale manufacturing demand big markets. Domestic markets, particularly in small markets such as Denmark and the Netherlands, simply can't generate enough demand. Nestlé is a good example of a business expanding globally because of the limited size of its home country market, Switzerland. Nestlé was shipping milk to nearly 20 different countries as early as 1875. Today, hundreds of thousands of businesses are recognizing the potential rich rewards to be found in international markets. Resource acquisition. More and more companies are going to the global marketplace to acquire the resources they need to operate efficiently. These resources may be skilled and unskilled labor, scarce raw materials, technology, or capital. Nike, for example, has manufacturing facilities in many Asian countries in order to use cheaper labor. Honda opened a design studio in Southern California to put that California flair into the design of some of its vehicles. Large multinational banks, such as Bank of New York and Citigroup, have offices in Geneva, Switzerland. Geneva is the private banking center of Europe and attracts capital from around the globe. The emergence of China and India. China and India, two fast-growing economies, are impacting businesses around the globe in very different ways. The boom in China's worldwide exports has left few sectors unaffected, be they produce growers in California, apparel makers in Mexico, or plastics manufacturers in South Korea. India's impact has altered how hundreds of service companies worldwide compete for billions of dollars in contracts. The causes and consequences of each nation's growth are somewhat different. China's exports have boomed largely thanks to foreign investment. Lured by low labor costs, big manufacturers have surged into China to expand their production base and push down prices globally. Manufacturers of all sizes, making everything from household supplies to automotive goods to clothing, are evaluating their processes either to reduce costs domestically or to outsource more of what they make to locations in China and India. Indians are playing invaluable roles in the global innovation chain. Hewlett-Packard, Cisco Systems, and other tech giants now rely on their Indian teams to devise software platforms and multimedia features for next-generation devices. Google distinguished research scientist Krishna Bharat set up the Google Bangalore lab, complete with colorful furniture, exercise balls, and a Yamaha organ. Like Google's Mountain View, California headquarters, to work on core search engine technology. Firms in India utilize new technologies such as AI and machine learning to optimize designs of everything from car engines to forklifts to aircraft wings for clients such as General Motors and Boeing. India has the potential to vault over Japan as the world's fourth biggest economy, and China is poised to move into the #1 spot. Globally, AI integration is at the forefront. Firms are heavily investing in this technology, and new firms are emerging to support AI growth. According to Stanford University, private investment in the United States in AI was over $105 billion in 2024, which was 12-fold higher than China's investment at $9.3 billion. Morgan Stanley reports that firms that adopt AI are seeing cash flow margins that are twice that of the global average. Data also suggests nearly 2/3 of firms using AI indicate that the technology is fostering innovation in their organization, which is a key component of competing in the global marketplace. Additionally, governments are evaluating existing infrastructures, such as electricity grids, to determine if they are positioned to handle AI needs. According to the Federal Reserve, the United States, Canada, and France are at the top of the list in terms of the Global Innovation Index. This index measures a country's capacity and preparedness for AI technology in terms of investment conditions, infrastructure requirements, and computing capacity. An emerging and growing trend is that technical and managerial skills in both China and India are becoming more critical. China's focus remains on mass manufacturing and building their capacity for both electronics and heavy industrial plants. India is taking a lead in software design and services and precision engineering.
Ethics in practice. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Corporations like Albertsons, Unilever, Kimberly-Clark, and Siemens are starting to take action on the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals. For many years, through corporate social responsibility (CSR) programs, corporations have donated money and employee time to address various social and environmental problems, both globally and in their own backyards. The Carnegie Foundation and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation are examples of this commitment. While these efforts have achieved some progress in environmental protection, ethical business practices, building sustainable positive impacts, and economic development by organizations, they require deeper and longer engagement. Because the benefits to corporations' profitability are mostly peripheral, short-term impacts such as a drop in demand often mean that attention is drawn away from CSR programs to attending to immediate bottom-line issues. In 2015, the United Nations member nations adopted 17 resolutions aimed at ending poverty, ensuring sustainability, and ensuring prosperity for all. The aggressive goals were set to be met over the next 15 years in order to achieve the UN's 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. 1. End poverty in all its forms everywhere. 2. End hunger, achieve food security and improve nutrition, and promote sustainable agriculture. 3. Ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all at all ages. 4. Ensure inclusive and equitable quality education, and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. 5. Achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. 6. Ensure availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. 7. Ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. 8. Promote sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment, and decent work for all. 9. Build resilient infrastructure, promote inclusive and sustainable industrialization, and foster innovation. 10. Reduce inequality within and among countries. 11. Make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. 12. Ensure sustainable consumption and production patterns. 13. Take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. 14. Conserve and sustainably use the oceans, seas, and marine resources for sustainable development. 15. Protect, restore, and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems, sustainably manage forests, combat desertification, and halt and reverse land degradation, and halt biodiversity loss. 16. Promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development. Provide access to justice for all, and build effective, accountable, inclusive institutions at all levels. 17. Strengthen the means of implementation and revitalize the global partnership for sustainable development. Companies like Albertsons recognize that a robust CSR program can enhance a corporation's reputation, which can indirectly boost the bottom line. They used number 14 on the United Nations Sustainability Development List in concert with World Oceans Day to announce that they, as a company, pledged to meet the UN goals. We recognize that the well-being of people and the sustainability of our oceans are interdependent. As one of the largest U.S. retailers of seafood, we are committed to protecting the world's oceans so they can remain a bountiful natural resource that contributes to global food security, the livelihoods of hardworking fishermen, and the global economy, said Buster Houston, VP of National Merchandising at Albertsons Companies. The company is also committed to the concept of fair trade and was the first retailer to sell tuna with the fair trade seal. Siemens, the German-based multinational company, also supported the adoption of meeting the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals, which they believe aligns with their company values: responsibility, excellence, innovation. They define sustainable development as the means to achieve profitable and long-term growth. In doing so, they align themselves with the goals of the UN's 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Critical thinking questions. 1. Why would companies pledge to meet the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals when their competitors could ignore them in the name of greater, perhaps short-term profits? 2. Are you as a consumer more likely to purchase products from Albertsons rather than another grocery chain that did not agree to the United Nations Sustainability Program? If you were working for a company deciding to purchase a large industrial component that was 10% more expensive than a competing product, Would Siemens's affirmation of meeting the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals sway your decision? How would you explain the rationale for your decision?
Concept check. 1. What trends will foster continued growth in world trade? 2. Describe some of the ways businesses can take advantage of these trends to go global.
Preparing for tomorrow's workplace skills. 1. How can a country's customs create barriers to trade? Select a country, perhaps one not discussed in the chapter, and describe such barriers in that country. Then give examples of problems that U.S. business professionals might experience when interacting with colleagues in that country. 2. How has Brexit impacted the UK, the European Union as a whole? 3. Do you think that CAFTA has a major impact on the U.S. economy? Why? 4. What do you think is the best way for a small company to enter international trade? Why? 5. How can the United States navigate the growth happening in China and India? 6. Identify some U.S. multinational companies that have been successful in world markets. How do you think they have achieved their success? 7. Team activity. Divide the class into teams. Each team should choose a country and research its infrastructure to determine how it will help or hinder trade. Include a variety of countries representing differently sized economies.
Ethics activity. The executives of a clothing manufacturer want to outsource some of their manufacturing to more cost-efficient locations globally. After visiting several possible sites, they choose one and begin to negotiate with local officials. They discover that it will take about 6 months to get the necessary permits. One of the local politicians approaches the executives over dinner and mentions that he can speed up the process for an advisory fee of $5,000. Using a web search tool, locate articles about bribery, and then write responses to the following questions. Be sure to support your arguments and cite your sources. Ethical dilemma. Is paying the advisory fee a bribe or an acceptable cost of doing business in that area of the world? What should the executives do before agreeing to pay the fee?
Critical thinking case. Netflix's global reach. Netflix is a well-known global streaming service. However, it did not start out that way. Netflix was founded in 1997 as an online DVD rental service located only in the United States. The company was founded to utilize technology not only to compete with brick-and-mortar movie rental options, but also to change the entire industry. Within just 10 years, technology and internet speeds had increased to the point where the firm saw more potential in the streaming market. Netflix's streaming service as we know it today was launched in 2007. Moving from the original business model of mailing DVD rentals to offering streaming services gave Netflix the opportunity to expand beyond domestic borders. Canada was the first target, and Netflix began offering subscription streaming services broadly in the country in 2010. Latin America followed in 2011. The concept caught on quickly and grew in popularity. Within a year, Netflix had nearly 3% of the Canadian population as subscribers. That grew to nearly 30% of English-speaking residents in less than 5 years, accounting for nearly 6 million subscribers. In 2014, the company expanded to the UK, followed by Australia in 2020. Despite this growth in customers, there were issues with content. In the United States, nearly 11,000 unique titles were offered on the platform. However, in Canada, there were less than 2,700. Even as recently as 2019, only around 2.5% of the content was local for Australians. Netflix's phased approach to moving into global markets was guided by pursuing those markets with the greatest potential. They also selected the markets based on consumer preferences, availability of strong internet networks, and the regulatory environment in those countries. Once they entered the global market, competition was considered. After their initial success in Canada, they were more aggressive during the years of 2015 to 2017 and expanded to about 130 new countries. Since 2017, The company has focused on more steady growth, coupled with addressing the localization of the content they provide to subscribers. They have invested in producing local content, acquiring the rights to local movies and shows, collaborating and partnering with local telecommunications providers, and evaluating their plans and pricing models to adjust to the needs of the various markets. Netflix has more than 230 million subscribers worldwide, with around 75 million located in the United States. The streaming service is now available in 190 countries across the globe. Critical thinking questions. 1. Do you think Netflix's future lies mostly in its international operations? Explain your reasoning. 2. What types of political, economic, and competitive challenges does Netflix face by operating worldwide? 3. What are some challenges with the company's aggressive strategy to expand globally to over 100 countries in a short amount of time? 4. How has Netflix overcome cultural differences to create a world brand? This has been Introduction to Business, 2nd edition, from OpenStax. OpenStax textbooks and this free audiobook are covered under a Creative Commons license. The full text is available at www.openstax.org. You can find this free audiobook anywhere you listen to podcasts, including Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts. Instructors can even download a course shell to easily embed these recordings in Canvas courses. Learn more by visiting www.openaudio.us. Did you find this audiobook helpful? If so, please let us know by leaving a comment and sharing this recording with a colleague or a friend.